What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Learning Culture Podcast. I am your host, Andrew Barry, and this is a show about building cultures of learning inside companies. What happens when everything you've worked for comes down to one moment and your body just stops working? My guest today is Scott Landers, CEO of Achievers, the recognition and rewards platform behind over 1 billion recognition moments across thousands of companies. But this conversation doesn't start in a boardroom. It starts on a college baseball mound where Scott, given a sink or swim ultimatum by his coach, froze. He couldn't grip the ball. He threw pitches 3 feet behind the batter. What he now recognizes as a panic attack followed him for 2 years, dry heaving before the CPA exam, dropping a public speaking class after the very first session. And then he made a decision that changed everything. In Scott's words, I hold the pen. I'm going to write the story. In this episode, Scott shares how he deliberately walked towards everything that scared him and how that hard-won sense of agency shaped him into the leader he is today. We talk about why the fear of failure never goes away and why becoming comfortable in your own skin can trump it. Then we bring it into the present. Why only 1% of CFOs are seeing ROI from AI. And Scott's compelling argument that it's because AI is happening to people, not with them. His thesis is that the AI transformation can't come top down. It has to come from the people closest to the work. And recognition is the lever that makes those new behaviors visible, repeatable, and scalable. Vulnerability is rare in leaders. Scott shows why it might be the most powerful thing you can offer. With that, let's sit back, relax, and enjoy my episode with Scott Landers. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Andrew. So great to be here.
Yes, I'm excited. I had the pleasure of seeing you keynote your customer conference at Achievers, and you told a story about your time as a baseball player in college. And I want to get into that story, but I think it's a good setting that we're recording this now. It's July 7th. The US national team played last night against Belgium. And I think a lot of Americans this morning are waking up disappointed, sad, and frustrated that the team kind of froze up on the big stage, right? And all that promise that had led to this moment, this big game, kind of came crumbling down. And so it's a lot to deal with. And I think that's a big theme of what we're going to talk about today. So before we dive into your story, do you want to say anything about that, about your emotions last night?
Yeah, I think, first in competition, you always have to remember you're playing against someone else who has every right to be on that field too, right? And when you play in these high stakes games, especially at that level of competition, it's not easy. Right. In one play or a little bit of momentum that goes in one direction, for a little bit of time, can change it. But, what I love about sports is, they're the ultimate teacher, and I think one of the keys to life is you take those disappointments, right? And it's oftentimes the areas that have the biggest impact, right? The biggest ways to learn. So I would say, as I didn't grow up playing soccer, and in the US is kind of catching up as far as being a soccer culture. But I think the team's come a long way, from 4 years from now. And I think the progress that they made is a great foundation. So the key is, like with anything in life, is what do they do from here? Do they use that, right, as a platform to then take it to the next level? Or do they regress, and as a human, and being a little bit older now than I was 30 years ago, when I'm going to, tell you some things that happened to me, you actually embrace, right, those moments, because it's where all the goodness comes. All the goodness comes in the hard. So my hope for the team is they take advantage of that and they give us another exciting, month or two, 4 years from now.
Yeah. And author their own story, which is exactly what you did. So let's go back to that. This was the story that captured my and everyone in that audience's imagination. Is you on the baseball mound in college, going through a similar sort of set of emotions and feelings to the US team. So just take us back there, set the scene for us. What happened?
Yeah, I'm actually going to tell you an extra story of how I even got to college. And so I was a good player in high school, but I was very lightly recruited. And back then, it was before the internet. I literally bought it was the size of a phone book, and it had every college with all the baseball information. And I would write letters, to all these coaches, giving them statistics back to Little League. I laugh at it now, hoping to get some response. But I had a couple of schools that were interested, that were Division III schools. And coincidentally, my dad and I happened to be at a summer league game, and he saw someone that he knew from high school, whose son was a very good player, had played on this very good team in Albany, New York, which is where I'm from. And my dad was telling him about my recruiting, and he's like, "Hey, you should really meet the coach of the team that my son plays for, because he's connected to everyone." So we went down to this guy's house. He was about 6'4", 90 pounds. So he had polio. He could sit and he could stand, but he coached the best youth baseball team, probably in New York State. Everybody on that team was going somewhere great. So I went down, I pitched for him in his backyard. And there was kids hanging out at the house playing pool, and the catcher came out and he caught a bullpen for me. And the coach said, "I think you're pretty good. I'm going to call this guy at Lemoyne College, Dick Rockwell, tell him I think you're good, and see if he'll take you." So sure enough, he picked up the phone. He called the guy that week, and I talked to him, and he said, "You're on the team. We'd love to have you." Never saw me play, just took this guy's word for it. And so, a little bit of learning there was the impact that you can have on somebody else's life. Right. So if my dad's friend didn't pick up that connection and introduce us to that coach, and if that coach didn't spend the half hour in his backyard and make that phone call, the trajectory of my life is very different. It's where I met my wife, at school. So now I get to school. I show up. I'm one of 18 people. I thought I was on the team. It turned out I just had the right to practice. I was fortunate enough my freshman year, as that roster of 18 pitchers went down to 7. I was in the top 7. And my team in my freshman year ended up making an amazing run in the NCAA tournament in Division I. We beat Arizona State, we beat Arkansas, and I ended up being on the 16th ranked team in the country. I only played a couple games, but the fact that I was one of the 7 people that traveled and played in that tournament was amazing. So now fast forward to my junior year. So my freshman and sophomore year, I played sparingly. But my junior year, I started to play a little bit more. And maybe 3 or 4 outings in, I was a pitcher. I had a bad game. And so the coach then said to me a few days later, he's like, "All right, Landers." He's like, "I'll give you one more shot, sink or swim." And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I've got 2.5 years invested in this, right? Like, I'm down to my last shot because I had a bad game. So anyway, I'm digesting all of this emotion throughout the week. I'm getting myself ready. I didn't shave for good luck, right? Tried to look a little bit tougher on the mound. And so I get on the mound, first batter, I get him out. Second batter gets a little dribbler to the shortstop, infield base hit, which for those who have played baseball, it's the most frustrating thing ever, right? Because you outsmarted the batter, but he got lucky. Next batter, I walked. And then all of a sudden, I began to feel the weight. And each batter after that, it got worse and worse. It got to the point where I actually couldn't even grip the baseball. So I can vividly remember throwing pitches that were 2-3 feet behind the batter. Didn't realize it at the time, but I was probably having some sort of a panic attack, right? Or severe anxiety while you're trying to perform at the highest level. So needless to say, that sink or swim, like I sank, right? And I sank pretty badly. And I remember I was dating my now wife at the time, being in the stairwell of my dormitory after the game, just like crying in the stairwell. And it wasn't so much the result of the game, but it was like, I don't understand what's happening to my body. Like, I don't understand this feeling. And so, I swallowed it, right? And the season continued. I didn't play again, the rest of the year. I was on the team, but I didn't get in another game. But what I noticed after that is that feeling which I hadn't had for 19 or 20 years started to come back every few months, right? Anytime I was trying something new, anytime I was in a pressure situation, because up to this point I had handled pressure just fine. Um, and it just happened over and over again. Like I remember taking the CPA exam my senior year, and I studied hard for this thing. I remember dry heaving behind a dumpster outside of the facility, right? Thinking, I don't know if I can even go in and take this test. It turned out I got a 92 on the test, right? I was way over prepared. Yeah,
Yeah.
because you don't get a medal for doing well. You just needed to get a
Yeah.
75 and pass, right? It was
Yeah.
pass fail. But then it was like I signed up for a public speaking class my second semester senior year. Went to the first class. They said, come back the second class and give a 2-minute speech on someone in your life. I got overwhelmed. I'm like, I can't do it. Right. And I dropped the class. And so it happened over and over again. And this was probably over the course of 18 months to 2 years. And then I said to myself, I'm like, all right, something is happening to me. And that's part of the problem. Right. I'm either going to let this happen to me and dictate where I go in my life, or I've got to take ownership of this and try and figure out a way to channel these emotions. And this was, today mental health is kind of top of mind for everyone, everywhere, whether you're in sports, whether you're at work. Back then, it wasn't talked about too much. But I do remember making this conscious decision that said, I hold the pen. I am going to write this story. And that moment that happened on the baseball field is either going to be the worst thing that ever happened to me, or it's going to be the best thing that ever happened to me. And the realization is that I get to decide which way that goes. And so from that point on, like public speaking was a big deal for me. So I signed up to teach first communion class with my mother. My brother was 8 years old at the time. I'm like, all right, I'll practice standing up in front of 28-year-olds. I signed up to teach the Coopers and Lybrand or PricewaterhouseCoopers today training because 2 years prior, I remember calling my father from a payphone at the hotel in Syracuse because I was in a little group project and we had to give a 5-minute report out on the project. And I was so nervous to talk in front of these 50 people. So I'm like, you know what? I'm actually going to sign up to instruct the 220 people that come through this place. And so, 30 years later, it seems like it was the flip of a switch. It wasn't, it was over several years. But what I noticed was because I was taking control, every mountain I had to climb got a little bit smaller. And me personally, I was a little bit stronger to climb that mountain. But what did change was that moment in my mind where I said, this is my story, and I am going to be the one that writes it.
Mm.
So just transformational for me.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm deeply moved by this again, hearing it for the second time, because I relate to so much of this story. I wasn't a great sportsman, but I actually am a CPA as well, have definitely had those exam nerves. The public speaking thing was huge for me. Like I couldn't get in front of an audience without like my whole body shaking and, clammy hands and that. And I just sorted out I sought out the opportunity to do it more and more so that I could get better at it. But anyway, I want to get back to 2 moments in there, if you don't mind, and go a little bit deeper into them. So the first one is that moment of that panic setting in, and that feeling like what you mentioned, there was a weight. You felt the weight suddenly as you were standing there on the mound. What was that weight? What were you holding?
I don't know. I've never actually been asked that question. It's probably certainly the fear of failure. It's probably just like the bottom, like we all have insecurities, right? And you look at other people and you're like, they don't have insecurities. Like they got it all figured out. But like just hearing you talk about, right? We have similar backgrounds. You felt the same way. Like if we all could get inside everybody else's body, I think 99% of the people would have 10x the confidence.
Yeah, that's such a good point.
Right? Because, and even one of the things that helped me a lot was just talking to other people. And as soon as I realized that other people felt similarly, I instantly felt better, and that weight began to leave. But I think for me, it was putting that sink or swim comment, right? I kind of put all the weight in, and when you love something, like I loved baseball, right? And I had put everything into it. And like for me, it was like, okay, everything I ever dreamed of or worked for was now down to this one moment. Right. Going back to the soccer game you talked about. The reality is it's not, right? But in that moment, you can put that weight on yourself. And as it relates, anything you're trying to perform in life, you've got to mentally get yourself in a state where you can just go and do your best work.
Yes, and enjoy.
Right. So if you translate this to business, right, that's part of what I try and do as a CEO is how do I enable 600 people at Achievers to do the best work of their life? How do we create that environment that they can bring their whole selves, bring their talents, work as a team? But if you think about the hardest thing to do is to do that for yourself, right? We're human, right? Our minds are wired differently, right? We get on loops sometimes. And I think I just felt the weight of like, it's everything you ever wanted was here in one moment,
Yeah. And then
and that can be overwhelming.
Yeah. Because our brains have this weird sort of glitch almost to then go and run a story of what
Right.
could happen or what might happen, which it's a completely fictitious story that then consumes our reality.
Yeah, I think I don't know what the statistic is, but it's probably like 90% of all worries never happen, right? But we probably spend 90% of our time on those things, right?
What a bad way to use your imagination, right?
Exactly. So, and you don't have the benefit of hindsight, right? Like, how do I expect my 20-year-old self to have my 50-year-old mind to be able to get through that, right? Like I didn't even know at the time the male brain doesn't fully form until like 25 or 26, right? So who knows? But this is where I think in society we've done so much better is that now the people around young people, I have children who've played sports in college, like the people around them, right, have a much keener sense of what they may be going through and how they can help prepare them to do the best work of their life, right? Or we see it, again everywhere. But back then it was just too much for me. But again, if that didn't happen, Andrew, I don't know that I would be where I am today, right? Because it kind of lit a spark.
And that's the second thing I want to get into. But as a bridge to that, you mentioned how talking to others helped you. I see this a lot in the work we do, that we learn best from each other, right? We do cohort-based learning for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if you can think of one or two people that particularly stood out for you and helped you in that moment.
Yeah, there's two, and it's clear as day. Certainly my wife, right, has always been there, right, and it's a great sounding board. And they say opposites attract. She's the opposite of me. So where my mind is always going and thinking about things that may never happen, she very much lives in the moment, right, and can see the bigger picture. So she was always helpful. But I remember back at that time, my mother-in-law, who was a stay-at-home mom while the kids grew up, but then went back and was a social worker. She was amazing. She was a huge turning point for me. I remember, I'll give you another story. I had one of these waves. I had graduated. I had a job at Coopers and Lybrand. I had a brand new car. It was the summer in between school and going to work, and I was driving to their home in Pennsylvania. And I remember having to pull over the highway because thought I was going to vomit. I was dry heaving on the side of I-87 going south from Albany towards New York City. And I remember when I got there, and it's the first time I think I talked openly. And I remember when I got to their house in Pennsylvania and I said, I just feel so overwhelmed. I don't know what it is, right? Because if anyone were to look from outside, I just went to a great school, Lemoyne College. I graduated. I had a job at one of the top accounting firms in the world, right? Like who wouldn't want to be me? And I just felt so overwhelmed. And I remember just talking to her and just being able to verbalize what I was feeling was the first step to things being better. And she was so great. And so, over the years, even as we had children and had, different issues you're thinking about or different life changes, right? She was always wonderful, not only for me, but for my wife to talk to.
Yeah, it's almost like these people in our lives give us like a reference to that a reference point for that feeling of being lost at sea, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, here's grounded in that reality, like you were saying earlier. And so you took that, you mentioned transformation, right? So this had a huge impact on you going through this tough moment, finding people around you that helped you find yourself, and then basically the word that comes to mind for me is agency, like in activating full agency in yourself, right? So like, okay, these things are happening to me. That is the worst that can happen, but I'm not going to let that happen. I'm going to go and take on the next challenge, try the new thing. And can you maybe talk through how that stacked up? Because again, I'm sitting across from you here as CEO of an incredibly successful company, an amazing track record, 4 kids, grandkids, right? Super successful. And to your point, I don't think we realize like how much people had to go through to get there, right? So could you like give us that quick sort of walk through like how you took that agency and what that did to your career and your life?
Yeah, I think, what it did is, and maybe I was challenging myself, but it was like one of the ways it helped me is I said yes to everything,
Hmm.
right? And what you often see in the work world is that people will see the opportunity in you before you may see it, right? They'll see what you can become. So over the years, someone would say, "Hey, can you take on this? Can you take on this project? Will you move your family to Toronto? Because we've just done our biggest acquisition and and you're 29 years old, and can you lead the integration? And can you be the director of finance for this company?" I had children 4 and 2, right? I'd never lived further than 3 miles from my parents. And I was like, sure, I'll go do it. Right.
Hmm.
I was
Hmm.
white knuckled, driving up in the minivan, to Toronto. And it was an amazing experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was always being ready. Right. And it was, the other thing it helps, when you recognize that you have that agency and you're writing a story, it also helps you realize that everybody else has a story too,
Yeah.
and you actually play a part in their story, right? So I always approached work as, how do I do my best to make those other people around me better? I never looked at my boss as wanting their job, as like, my job is to make my boss successful, right? And surrounding yourself with people that can always put others first, um, and leading by that example, has always served me well. So I think, there was always that little voice in the back of my head that anything that made me a little nervous, I was like, that's probably the right thing for me to do. So I'm going to go do it, and so not wait. So again, it's holding the pen. It's almost like, you remember when you were in class and you knew the teacher was going to call on someone. Think about how you felt when you were waiting to be called on versus when you raised your hand first to give
Yeah.
the answer,
That's such a
right?
good analogy. Yeah.
And it was that. And like, how do I use
Yeah.
that, throughout my life, whether it was at work, whether it was volunteering to coach my kids, um, in any of those areas, it's served me well. And we all have our lane, right? Because no two of us are the same, right? But everyone has a lane where they can pick those spots and do that.
Yeah. That is a big difference between please don't pick me to pick me. I'm going to give
Yeah.
this a shot. But did the fear of failure ever go away?
No, but what did emerge, which could trump the fear of failure, is being comfortable in your own skin.
Mm.
And so what I noticed over the years is, because, work isn't easy. They call it work for a reason, right? And you can be leading a great company, but you could be facing economic headwinds, geopolitical factors, a financial crisis, a COVID, this AI transformation we're in today. So even if you're doing all the right things, you're going to experience, right? You're going to experience challenges. When I worked for a public company, we had an activist investor, which, if you're familiar with those, they don't buy your stock because they believe you. They buy your stock because they think you're doing something wrong, and they go public with it, right? And so all of those things, if I look back now, and my 20-year-old self would never have said you could have gone through those things successfully. But I think what happened over time is I became comfortable with who I was. I became comfortable with the level of effort that I was putting in, and that I was the right person to do it. And if somebody else thought I wasn't the right person to do it, that's okay, right? Because I'm comfortable with who I am and what I bring to the table, right? Because everywhere you look, life is based on relationships, right? And there's good people, but the relationship just doesn't work, right? And if it ever comes to that, that's okay. But I'm comfortable with who I am, right? With how I'm walking the walk, how I'm talking the talk, and showing up for people. And I think that helps overcome that fear of failure because it never goes away, right? Brett Favre, who was the MVP of the NFL, was vomiting before the Super Bowl, and here he was the MVP. Greg Maddux, who is one of the best pitchers of all times, was starting the All-Star game. It wasn't even a game that counted, but he talked about how it's the most nervous he's ever been, right? Like, we all have that, but like, how you channel it and get comfortable with who you are, I think is when the tide really begins to turn.
Yeah. This is great, by the way. I'm really enjoying this conversation. There's a good connection here, I think, to what you do as a company at Achievers, and that's the role of recognition. And recognition is a story system in its own way, right? It tells people what mattered, it tells people what was seen, who they're becoming at work. It's such a gift to people. How do you see that? I mean, this story predates your time at Achievers, obviously. Like, how do you see that connection now, looking back on it all?
Yeah, first of all, I'll pick up on that word gift you used. Being the CEO of Achievers is the biggest gift in my career. It is the most amazing company to lead. And if you think about what we do as a company who's leading in recognition and reward, we allow the doers to be seen, right? And because they're seen and we're rewarding the right behaviors, it helps cultures align. And because behaviors are so integral to business performance, we help our customers in those businesses perform. But going back to kind of what we were talking about before, this whole notion that everybody has a story. If you think about what recognition does, the way it brings public recognition to the enterprise, it allows everybody's story to be seen, right? And so that is awesome. And when you recognize those behaviors, they are going to be repeated. So when you talk about the importance of people taking agency over what they can control, and in the workplace, a little secret for you, CEOs don't do very much. Like, my performance review is the sum total of the 600 people that work at Achievers, right? So if we can create an environment where they feel as though they're seen, that when they do the right thing and make that impact, that is visible to the organization, and they feel as though that they belong, and what they're doing is having an impact on our ultimate performance, it's a game changer. And so, leading Achievers, we do this. We've done this for thousands of companies over the years. There's 4 million individual members. There's over 1 billion data points in and around recognition. So 1 billion recognition moments. We're really proud of the work we do. And I think why it's so important today, as we live in this world of AI, this AI transformation, the way it's been managed by society. And I'll start with, think about everything we hear in the news. I don't know about you, but AI feels like it's something that's happening to us.
Oh, yes. Completely agree.
And if you think about, we're early days here in many of the areas that AI can have an impact. And what you'll see in the financial news today is that only 1% of CFOs are seeing any ROI from AI investment. And to me, it's simply because people today, AI is happening to them instead of AI happening with them. We haven't given people agency into redefining how the work that they do can be made better by AI. It's funny, I was in a board meeting probably 2 months ago, and one of our board members talked about this AI transformation and how it's different than any other transformation he's lived through. He said, most transformations come from the top down. They're well understood. They're waves of change that come every 3 to 5 years. They're well researched by academics. Consultants get skilled on them. They train us, right? We come in, we enable the organization, and then we go and implement that change, whether it's a new go-to-market strategy, entering a new geography, launching a new product line, reorganizing the organization. But it's top down. This change, we've asked 8 billion people in the world, go tool around with AI and go give us 30-40% more productivity with no playbook, with no training, and we expect it to work. So this has to come from the bottoms up, but we haven't given people agency yet. And I think that is critical for AI transformation. And we think at Achievers that recognition can play a big role in that transformation. Because Andrew, what we're asking you to do, I see you're in an office, right? There's folks in and around working. Those individuals, what they do every day, their behaviors are going to change over the next 3 to 4 years. They're going to figure out how AI can take over some of the things that are more routine that don't provide them value. They're going to keep those things that give them energy and drive significant value than only humans can do. Well, that behavioral shift, that's no different than aligning your behaviors to core values. So if we can identify those behaviors that need to change, recognize those behaviors in the moment, and not wait 18 months until that efficiency has been gained, but acknowledge those behaviors along the way, I think it'll do two things. I think it'll make companies more successful. And I think it'll let people know that they actually hold the pen here, because they are the ones that are closest to the work.
Yeah. And as you think about scaling that capacity for agency to 600 people, what are some of the behaviors, and maybe this is beyond Achievers as well, but also at your clients, what are some of the behavioral gaps that you think need to be closed, and some of the behaviors that you want to encourage more of?
Yeah, I think the first thing you want to explore with AI is exploration. Right, there's a big chunk of the population that are actually against AI, that really don't want to lean into it, right? So the first thing is how do we create an environment where people are free to explore, right? They're encouraged. There's lots of things we can do around personal productivity. So right there, your recognition system can play a big role, right? Because if you and I are on the same team and you're exploring and I'm not, and you are recognized for some of the new things you found, you share that maybe at a departmental meeting or a company meeting, you're recognized in the system. All of a sudden, as your peer sitting next to you, I understand that I need to raise my game. But also, maybe if I was hesitant, I now have a playbook, because we've actually talked about the path that Andrew took to achieve some of that personal productivity, right? We talked about the new behaviors. We talked about the specific things you did in that recognition moment. And we talked about the impact that it had, right, on your daily work. So that's first and foremost. I think also when it comes to scaling, I think with respect to AI, you need to break it down into buckets. For us at Achievers, we've defined kind of 4 lanes. And they're really easy to understand, but they have different behaviors, they have different expectations, and they'll have different investments. So first is you have this personal productivity. Everybody's free to explore the cabin, go see what you can do, write your emails better, help you be more productive. There's other areas where AI is more mature, right? So within development and coding, right? So we're encouraging our teams to go and deploy that on new things. Maybe you go AI first and you see how that can work out. There's another stack here that big enterprise software companies are going to bring AI to our fingertips. I don't think that the Workdays of the world and the Salesforces of the world and the NetSuites of the world are going away, right? Those companies are investing heavily in AI, and a lot of our productivity will be gained when those companies now deploy their AI capabilities within our environment where we know our data is safe. And then the behaviors of how people use those systems are defined. Then there's the last bucket, which is, Andrew, what do you and I uniquely know about our business that some company isn't going to solve for us, right? What is our alpha, right? What is different for us, and where can we go and build some AI connectivity?
Yeah.
But it really's got to go bottoms up, and you have to think about in each one of those stacks. Now, those are the ways that we've defined them. Other companies may do something slightly different, but it all boils down to the basic thing. When you're 600 people, 150,000 people come to work, what are the behaviors that you need to be different for you to capitalize on this opportunity? Which is no different than what companies have been doing for decades as it relates to that new initiative, that new product, that opportunity to cross-sell, that opportunity to improve safety, right? It was all about behaviors. And so I think the opportunity here from a scale perspective is to stop talking about the technology. Let's digest that. And now let's talk about the human element of this, how they're going to intertwine and how we as humans can harness that power and behave differently.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to start to bring this to a close. I think my last substantive question is on this last bucket, because I think that's the really interesting one for me. I think about this a lot with my own business. The differentiator, like what is it that separates your collection, your tribe of people from another company that's trying to execute the same idea, right? Because the idea is fungible. Like anybody can get, the recognition concept and sort of trying it, but it's how you execute it that makes Achievers unique. And I think what we do, same thing. A lot of that is built through judgment. It's not inherited, right? You have to build it from the ground up, like you were saying earlier, and it's built through judgment. So, can you reflect on how you are perpetuating that judgment building in the organization, especially for younger people coming through who don't, you and I, and maybe you more than me, have had the benefit of that compounding experience, right? Which has built judgment in us that we can see when things look good and when they don't, and can make quick decisions on things. But for many earlier in their careers, this is something they're still building. What's your feeling on how they can build that capability?
Yeah, I think a couple things. One is, you made the comment, and I appreciate the compliment, which is Achievers does things pretty well. I won't take credit for that. I had a huge head start in that the people that work at Achievers so love what we do and what we stand for, and they live it like we're our own best customer. I think what I've tried to do, maybe I'll answer this question and how I've tried not to screw that up, right, is the leaders need to walk the walk, right? So it was clear I had never worked at a company that had a recognition system. I was always a people-centered leader, so this felt like the right place for me. But the people around me quickly showed me what I needed to be doing as the leader from a recognition perspective in order for our culture to continue to thrive and evolve, right? Because we were also implementing a lot of change at that time. So I had to get in there. I had to make sure I was recognizing folks. I saw the impact of that when I got my first recognition, right, on what that power could have. But the other thing that we needed to do, and I'll get to your point on young people, is it's often the case when companies go from startup to then more mature, that there's a transition that folks go through where they're used to looking up and they say, what do we do next? Or I've got a problem, and they look up and they say, what do you want me to do? I came in with the background of being a CPA. I've never sold, I've never coded, so I don't know what to do anyway. So my knee-jerk reaction was, why are you asking me, right? You have the power to not only understand the problem, right, but to solve it. And so we've tried to push down decision-making and give people agency at the closest area to the customer, whether that's our external customer or internal customer. And the way that you create that environment and create an area where young people, right, can come in, because everybody is an expert at something, even if you're entry level, that thing you're doing, right, which may seem repetitive or at lower level, it's actually critically important. And there's no better person in the company to understand what could be better there than you, because you live it all day, every day. So we encourage our people to do that. We encourage our people to give us feedback. And then coming back, to walking the walk, we as leaders have to recognize those behaviors, right? We have to shine a spotlight on them so other people will follow. And we also have to create an environment where we can give them the flexibility to make those decisions, but also recognize when the decisions have to be bumped up, right? Because they can't make every decision. Someone who just started at the company can't decide who we're going to go and acquire, right? Or what we may sell. So where my focus is how do we give room for people to run and let them know they can do that unencumbered, and then make it really clear, right, when the next level of leadership gets together, reprioritizes, and helps make a different set of decisions. In any of those cases, though, like everything we've talked about, going back to my original story, it all comes down to human behavior. My personal life changed when my behaviors changed. When I said, I am going to take agency, I am going to volunteer to do the things that make me uncomfortable, right? My business life changed when I decided that I was going to take those risks, take those assignments, and it goes all the way down today. My world at Achievers got better when I got the feedback that I needed to recognize more often in the system, right? And once I did, all of a sudden the connection that I had with the organization was much deeper. On the flip side, the behaviors that I exhibited that people liked around transparency, which I was a little nervous to be so transparent, when I got recognized for that at a company meeting, right after a company meeting, it totally accelerated my thinking in that area, because now I'm going to repeat it. I felt good about it, right? It was an area I took a risk and it was validated. So I love what we do, and I'm so glad you gave me the opportunity to talk about it. And I apologize in advance. You asked me a question, I give you a 10-minute answer, but it's a downfall. No behavior I have can ever change that.
The only downside is that it gives me 10 other follow-up questions, and this could go on for another few hours, but we don't have that time. I want to wrap things up here. Your point, I think this is, for me, the central point here, and it's this idea of how do we transfer or empower people to have agency now, all the way down to the youngest, most junior person in the company. It seems like mission critical to do that now in an age of AI where everything is accelerated and everyone can produce so much more on their own. So how do we empower people with that? I think my biggest takeaway from your conference, and it's reinforced in this conversation, is how recognition is actually a lever for behavior change. Do you want to comment on that quickly?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And, we've been at this for 20 plus years, and we have what we call the recognition maturity curve, right? People start out, it's cultural alignment. But if you look at companies that have been with us over a decade, they're using this to fuel their business performance well beyond engagement and retention, which is a huge ROI unto itself, right? But how do I cross-sell more? How do I make a safer environment? How do I up-level my learning and development, et cetera, et cetera? But they've done that because they've taken the time, and you can relate this back to AI, to articulate what are we looking to achieve, what needs to be different, and what are those new behaviors that are going to get us there. And once you get to that behavior point, you can use recognition to identify those moments that occur in everyday work, which will significantly improve the outcomes that you're waiting for 12 months from now, right? I think everybody's used to, let's set a target for 12 months from now, and we'll celebrate when we hit that target, or we'll figure out how to pivot 12 months from now. If you can recognize in the moment, you're actually adding more fuel to the fire throughout the year and are going to significantly improve your opportunity to overachieve. And so with AI, we need to be more explicit. We need to weave in the tech conversation with the human conversation. We need to give people who are closest to work the agency to redefine the work that they do and not be told what they're going to do, because they're going to identify things that we never would have thought of. Right? The board cannot determine what an SDR or an accounts payable, right, or an account executive is doing. Only they can do that really well. And so my hope is, because AI is so new, right, that these other conversations begin to weave in, and we believe here at Achievers, we can not only help facilitate those conversations with our customers, but also help them implement the change that they want to see in their business.
Yeah, that's well said. Andy Grove has this concept of Cassandras from his book, Only the Paranoid Survive, people that are closest to the to the action, right? And you talked about those people, that empowering them with, no one can tell them to be more agentic or to have higher agency, but leaders can show them by doing it themselves. And it just takes me back to your story, standing on the mound. And no one could talk you out of that scenario. Like, no one could. You had to have figured that out yourself, right? And there were people around you that could show you what good looks like and show you what good is in you, but you had to step up and be that person. And for me, that relates to my philosophy that the answers exist within all of us. Like, the 600 people in your org have the answers, and we can all just really all focus on having better questions. We'll get to that outcome eventually. So yeah, Scott, I just want to thank you so much for agreeing to come on this. I kind of approached you, I ambushed you after your talk, and you enthusiastically agreed. And I'm really glad you did, because this was an incredible conversation. I think very valuable for people.
Well, it's my pleasure, and it's an honor to anytime I get a chance to talk about achievers, talk about my alma mater, Lemoyne College, and my favorite pastime. Even though I didn't have great statistics, baseball gave me a great life lesson, which has served me well. So I really appreciate the time.
Amen to that.